Hi, also this is Sean. Today's video is going to be about quartz watches at a luxury price point and essentially whether they're a waste of money, whether I think I would buy one, and if so, why, if not, why not. So it's something that's been on my mind a little bit recently because I've been thinking about the new tank most and weighing up whether quartz is something that I can cope with, I guess, over the long term. So obviously a quartz watch runs on a battery, and quartz watches, just like mechanical watches, come in different shapes and sizes. So you've got things like the Tank Must, which I've just mentioned, and it's new out, but previously there was a Must with quartz. You've got things like the Grand Seiko 9F movement, which is, a lot of people say, is one of the best quartz movements that you can buy. Also, Grand Seiko were proud enough of that movement to actually have a display back on one of their watches, which is pretty cool. You've got brands like Tag that use a lot of quartz in their watches, and then you've got things like the Oyster Quartz, which is obviously Rolex's only quartz watch that came out back in the 1970s, and it was supposed to be as serviceable, if you like, as a mechanical watch, and they're supposed to be really good, really accurate. And then you've got Breitling and their high accuracy quartz. So, quartz watches, when people are kind of dismissive of quartz watches, it does make me a little bit dubious, because you can't ever say I don't like this when there's so much variety, if you like. But in terms of my thoughts, in terms of the pros and cons of quartz watches at a luxury price point, I mean, I think one thing that I would say is, if I had one watch, I definitely wouldn't make it a quartz watch. That's just my personal opinion, because I don't like quartz watches as much as I like mechanical watches. But on the other hand, as part of a collection, it's completely fine, because you're gonna let some of them rest in the watch case, and it is a pain to start winding them up and setting them all the time, and having a quartz piece is just more practical in that sense. But now I'll just go through some of my pros and cons in terms of having a quartz watch at a luxury price point. I think it makes a big difference as well, because it's something that makes me think a little bit more if the watch is a little bit more pricey, given the fact that the Cartier Must is £2,000, well, more than £2,000, £2,310. But in terms of pros and cons, first of all, a pro, the practicality of it. What I've just said about, if you leave your watches and you wear different pieces and you've got 10 watches in your collection or whatever, then if you leave a quartz, obviously it's not going to need resetting, it's not going to need the time change, and in that sense it's just more practical. You can pick it up and use it in that sense. But I think in terms of practicality as well, if you've got something like a G-Shock, then you don't worry about it so much, because a mechanical movement could be more delicate and more prone to breaking. So in that sense, it's practical in that sense too. Cost, in terms of servicing, something that I've been thinking about, because I own two what you might call luxury watches, and I guess part of me dreads the idea that both of those watches will need servicing at the same time, because Rolex service can cost £600 for a bog standard service to £600. That's not something that I'd just be able to just pay just like that. Whereas a quartz watch, it's just a case of replacing the battery and maybe a quick movement service. So that's something that makes me think, maybe go for the Tank Must in quartz, because you don't have that additional outlay. You don't even have to send it back to Cartier. Apparently the battery replacements from Cartier are quite expensive. So that's something that's making me think, because the Cartier is primarily, it's about the design, and it's more like a piece of jewelry, if I want to put it that way. And in terms of variety as well, it'd be boring to have the same automatic movements, the same manual wind movements. I always thought, in terms of three luxury watches, a good three would be, I've got a Speedmaster manual, I've got an Explorer automatic, and a Seiko 9F. You know, you got automatic, manual, quartz, and they're quite good as a combination. And also, you know, you've got your chrono, your Speedmaster, you've got your time only watch, and you've got your GMT. They make a 9F GMT. And in terms of, you know, if you're buying a watch for its design, it doesn't actually matter what movement's in it as much. I think I keep on going on about the tank must, but to get a mechanical movement in a Cartier, you're talking much more expensive. The Louis Cartier with a manual movement is okay. It's in solid gold, but it's £11,000 as against 2,310. That's a humongous difference. You know, if you're just going for design, who cares? And quartz, I mean, people can be a little bit snobby about quartz, but quartz watches have been available for 50 years. It's tried and true technology. It's something that provides accuracy. Yeah, perhaps it doesn't have the romance of an automatic movement or a manual wind movement. It doesn't make me feel like the watch is engineered in the same way. But I guess, you know, that doesn't apply to all watches, because you've got the 9F, which is amazingly engineered. There's so much thought gone into that, so much development. So I guess in terms of quartz, you know, you're talking about quartz over here, which is a Daniel Wellington with a $2 quartz movement versus the 9F, which is different. I think the Cartier is probably something in between, maybe closer to the Daniel Wellington, to be honest. But again, you're not buying that watch necessarily for the movement. In terms of cons, it does maybe make you think that the watch is not as high quality, maybe a little bit cheaper. You know, the making the watch to shift units, put the cheapest movement you can in it. There's been stuff about plastic movement holders in tags and in Cartiers and things like that. These are luxury items. Part of me feels that, you know, if a kind of looked at it on my wrist, I'd be thinking this isn't as special as I would like it to be, and it's supposed to be. You know, that's why I'm buying it. I'm buying it to make me feel like I'm wearing something special, and it's a loss of money to spend on a watch. I said this already. You know, less romance. It's less special. You know, the idea that it's a bit more oldie worldy. The idea of an automatic movement, a manual movement. It's something that feels like more you're in touch with history, if you like. I mean, it's a bit sad, I guess, but whereas quartz has got less romance. You know, it's something that's purely for time telling purposes. Obviously, it's superior, but it's not really about that, is it? It's an interesting one, but I mean, again, it doesn't hold for all quartz movements. You know, the 9F and the Oyster Quartz and things like that are perhaps more akin to mechanical movements than otherwise. Would it bother me over time in terms of a con? You know, would I start to think, why have I bought a quartz watch? You know, what have I done? How come I've spent that much money on a quartz watch? Would it kind of eat away at me over time? Potentially, if I'm thinking that now, perhaps it might, but who knows? Horologically, it does speak to me less. You know, I think I'm into watches partially because of the design, but partially because it's something a bit more traditional. It's something with a bit more authenticity about it, whereas a quartz watch has not got that to a certain extent. And I mean, tell me what you think. Obviously, I'm going to ask the question at the end of the video, but you know, what do you think about quartz watches? Sometimes on the channel you get comments saying, you know, I only like mechanical movements and things like that. I think, how many of my watches are quartz? 3 out of 8. One's a smartwatch, and I'm not even sure if that's quartz. It's not quartz as such. In terms of cons, does it make this watch a fashion watch? You know, Cartier tank must. Is it just about? Is it kind of superficial and you know, you make it just about this is a Cartier, but it doesn't have any value aside from the name, if you like. And I don't think I agree with that, because I think that the Cartier tank is more than just a movement. It's much more than that. It's a historical watch, so to call it a fashion watch is a little bit silly, really, unless you're completely stretching the idea of the term. But it's something that probably gets people thinking. And obviously the reason that I'm thinking about this question in terms of quartz watches in the luxury price point is in terms of the must. And the must is only just released in April, and there's a solar version which comes out in September. So there's a bog standard quartz version, and there's a solar version which is called a photovoltaic movement. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. And basically it's charged by the sun. There's little indentations in the Roman numerals which let the light through, and then it's charged that way. And apparently the battery life is 16 years. But I'm a bit torn about that because, we don't know where this technology is going to be in 16 years' time. And part of me feels that a quartz watch, you could replace the battery yourself for 20 quid, whereas the solar you would have to send it back to Cartier. It costs hundreds of pounds, maybe more, who knows. Maybe the technology will be dead, by the time it comes to, having the second service, if you like. And I'm thinking much more about kind of making the collection not too ridiculous in terms of, service costs. To service some of these watches cost more than to service a car. Am I going to be able to afford this in the future? Am I going to want to shell out that money? So perhaps quartz is, more practical in that sense, and it would be the dress watch, and it is more about the design of the watch, really, rather than the movement. So in terms of a conclusion, I'm a bit torn, really. So part of me feels that a quartz, for one out of the 3 luxury watches that I would own, is kind of like a sensible choice, because you've got that one quartz piece and it's for a very specific role. And do you need all mechanical movements? It's a good question. And a watch being quartz doesn't make it a bad watch. And in terms of, I always feel that in terms of watches, what I'm looking for in a watch is authenticity. And authenticity is a continuum. So you've got, Rolex Explorer. I see that as being fairly completely authentic. It's in-house. It's made completely by Rolex. It's got a history. It stands out on its own. And then you've got on the other side, something like a Daniel Wellington or something, which is purely about the design, if you like. There's nothing authentic about this watch. It's got a really cheap movement. It's just a superficial kind of design. And then you've got everything in between. I would see the Cartier as being somewhere in between there, but it's got real history. It's got an amazing design, but it's got a quartz movement in it. It's an interesting question. Tell me what you think about quartz movements in a luxury price point. And if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.